It was one of those afternoons that just felt perfect. The sun was warm but not oppressive, the breeze soft enough to lift my hair as I walked to the car. I had packed Robert's favorite lunch, lemon herb chicken with roasted potatoes, the one I only made when I wanted to spoil him. He'd been so tense lately, always complaining about deadlines and endless meetings. I thought maybe this would help him breathe, maybe even make him laugh. On the drive over, I rehearsed what I'd say when I handed him the bag. Something playful, something that reminded him I was on his side. When I walked into the lobby, the air hit me, overly cold, sterile, smelling faintly of disinfectant and copier ink. I spotted the receptionist, a woman I'd seen before at a Christmas party. "Hi," I smiled, holding up the bag like a peace offering. "I'm just here to drop off lunch for Robert." She looked at me, not with the friendly recognition I expected, but with a strange, uneasy hesitation. Her eyebrows furrowed. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Robert hasn't worked here for months. He resigned. Didn't he tell you?" For a moment, I swear my ears were ringing. Months? Resigned? My face stayed still. I nodded, forced a polite, "Thank you," and turned away as if nothing had happened. But once I got to my car, I just sat there, gripping the lunch bag like it was an anchor. My fingers were trembling. I stared straight ahead, unable to process what I'd just heard. It felt like someone had slid a crack right through the middle of my world, and I could already feel it widening. I kept thinking maybe the receptionist had made a mistake. Maybe there was another Robert. Maybe she was new and didn't know what she was talking about. But the certainty in her voice, it was like she'd just handed me a truth I never asked for. I stared at the building through the windshield, half expecting him to walk out any second, briefcase in hand, giving me that crooked smile he wore when he saw me unexpectedly. But the door stayed shut. My chest felt tight, as if my ribs had been pulled in with a drawstring. I thought about the mornings, him tying his tie in the mirror, kissing me quickly before heading out. I thought about all those late nights he'd explained away with just wrapping up a project, or traffic was a nightmare. All those times I'd defended him when friends hinted that he seemed distant. My mind started running backward, piecing together scraps I'd ignored. The cash withdrawals, the missed calls, the new cologne he never wore for me. Suddenly, everything seemed like part of a picture I hadn't been invited to see. The lunch sat on the passenger seat, untouched, smelling faintly of lemon and rosemary. It made my stomach turn. I didn't cry, not yet. The tears were waiting, heavy behind my eyes. But something in me refused to let them fall here, in this parking lot. I started the car, my hands still shaking, and pulled away. The sun was still shining, the sky still impossibly blue, but it all felt like a cruel joke. And as I drove home, one question kept looping in my head, louder than the hum of the engine. If he's not going to work, then where has he been going? By the time I got home, the silence felt heavier than usual. It wrapped around me like a damp blanket, suffocating, sticky. I set the lunch bag on the kitchen counter and just stared at it. The thought of opening it, of eating anything, made my throat tighten. My hands moved on their own, grabbing a glass of water, setting it down untouched, like I needed to prove to myself I was still functioning. But my mind was already miles away, chasing shadows I didn't want to find. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. His side was unmade from that morning, the sheet still holding the shape of where he'd lain. I reached over, my fingers brushing the pillow, and felt that familiar sting in my chest. How many mornings had he left from here, smiling, telling me he'd be back before dinner? And how many of those smiles had been lies? I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, but every inhale seemed to pull in more questions I couldn't answer. That night, I decided I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. If Robert had been hiding something from me for months, he clearly thought I was too blind to notice. Maybe, just maybe, I could use that to my advantage. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew one thing for certain. The man I thought I knew was already slipping away, and I needed to find out exactly where he'd been before he disappeared completely. That night, I lay in bed with my back to him, pretending to be asleep when he finally walked in. I heard the soft rustle of his clothes, the faint click of his phone screen before he set it on the nightstand. He slid under the covers like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't been living in an entirely different reality than the one I thought we shared. My heart pounded, but I kept my breathing steady. If he noticed my stiffness, he didn't say a word. The next morning, over coffee, he complained about a long meeting the day before and how exhausted he was. I watched him talk, nodding at all the right moments, while my mind replayed the receptionist's words in a loop. I didn't ask about work. I didn't let him know that the ground beneath him had already started to crack. If he was going to keep lying, I wanted to see just how far he'd go. Later that evening, after he fell asleep on the couch, I grabbed my laptop and logged into our bank account. My stomach dropped. There were large cash withdrawals, always in round numbers, spread across the last few months. Hotel charges, dinners at places I'd never been with him. The evidence wasn't loud or flashy, but it was there, threaded through our finances like a quiet confession. And in that moment, I realized the truth might be far uglier than simple unemployment. I sat there in the dim light of the living room, the glow of the laptop making the shadows around me seem even darker. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as if stopping could make the truth disappear. But each new transaction I clicked on painted a clearer picture. Money dripping away like a slow leak I hadn't noticed, each drop funding a life I wasn't part of. I thought of the cologne I'd smelled faintly on his jacket last week. Not mine, not his usual scent. I had brushed it off as maybe a sample from a store. Now it clung in my memory like a warning I'd ignored. My chest felt tight, a mix of rage and disbelief twisting together. I tried to remember the last time we had gone out together for dinner, the last time he'd spent money on us. I couldn't. The withdrawals told a story, but it was missing the main character. Her. Whoever she was costing him more than money. She was costing me my marriage, piece by piece, and I didn't even know her face. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing from the couch. How could he sleep so easily while I sat here drowning in questions? I thought about waking him, throwing the evidence in his face, demanding answers right then. But something inside me, something new, sharper, told me to wait. If I played this right, I wouldn't just get the truth, I'd get control. The next few days, I became an actress in my own home. I laughed at his small jokes, asked about his meetings, and even packed his lunch one morning like I used to. Every word I spoke felt rehearsed, carefully measured, so he'd have no idea I was already peeling back the layers of his lies. Inside, though, I was a live wire. Every detail he gave me was stored away. Every slip in his story filed in a mental cabinet I was building just for him. At night, when he thought I was scrolling through recipes or checking emails, I was digging deeper. I searched the names of restaurants on his statements, found their menus, imagined him sitting at a table across from someone else. I pictured her laugh, her hand brushing his, the way he might look at her in the soft light. My stomach churned, but I kept going, because now it wasn't just about knowing if he was cheating. It was about knowing everything. One thing was becoming clearer by the hour. This wasn't a man who had stumbled into a mistake. This was someone building a second life with precision and arrogance. And I was going to dismantle it piece by piece until he was standing in the ruins. But first, I had to see exactly where he went when he left in the morning with that tie and briefcase. The first morning I decided to follow him, I felt like I was stepping into someone else's life. I waited until he left, tie perfectly knotted, travel mug in hand, giving me a quick kiss before walking out the door. I counted to 30 before grabbing my keys and sliding into my car. My heart was pounding, not from fear of being caught, but from the electric charge of knowing that finally, I was about to pull back the curtain on his performance. He didn't drive toward the office. He didn't even take the freeway. Instead, he wound his way through side streets until he stopped at a cafe I'd never been to. I parked a few spaces away, my sunglasses on, pretending to scroll through my phone while I watched him through the rearview mirror. He sat at a corner table with his laptop, sipping coffee, chatting casually with the barista. No rush, no stress, definitely no work. The next day, I followed again. This time, he left the cafe after an hour and drove to a small apartment complex on the other side of town. I didn't see him come back out. I sat there for 2 hours, gripping the steering wheel, watching other tenants come and go. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them innocent. The man who had told me every morning he was heading to the office was actually stepping into a life I'd never been invited into. By the third day, I knew this wasn't just a detour, it was a routine. The cafe, the apartment complex, sometimes a late lunch at a bistro that didn't even open until noon. He moved through his days with the ease of someone who believed no one was watching, but I was watching. And every mile I trailed him, every receipt I photographed from the cafe trash bin, every timestamp I noted, it all became part of a growing dossier. Still, I wanted more than my own eyes could give me. So I called a private investigator, someone discreet and seasoned, the kind who could blend in anywhere. When I handed him the initial details, license plate, addresses, dates, he gave me a look that was part pity, part professional focus. "We'll find out everything," he said. It was both comforting and devastating, because part of me already knew what he'd find. The PI didn't take long. Within days, I had photos. Robert at the apartment with a woman, their heads close together, arms brushing, laughter frozen mid-frame. They looked comfortable, practiced. And then there were the receipts, dinners, weekend trips, even a pair of concert tickets. I stared at the evidence, my pulse steady, almost unnervingly calm. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a fact. He had built an entire life using our money, our time, our trust. And I was about to take it all back. I tucked the folder of evidence into the back of my closet, behind a stack of old blankets, where I knew he'd never look. Each time I opened it, I added something new. A time-stamped photo, a bank statement, a printout of text messages the PI had intercepted. It felt like I was quietly building a weapon, one I'd use when the moment was right. This wasn't just about catching him. It was about making sure he couldn't walk away without losing everything he thought he controlled. Before I confronted him, I needed to make sure I wasn't the one left with the wreckage. So I booked an appointment with a lawyer, a woman recommended by a friend who had walked away from her own cheating husband with more than just her dignity. We talked through the finances, the joint accounts, the house, the retirement fund. By the time I left her office, the legal paperwork was in motion to secure everything that was rightfully mine. Driving home, I felt an odd sense of peace, the kind that comes when you know the ending of the story before the final chapter even begins. Robert had no idea his quiet mornings at the cafe, his afternoons in that apartment, were numbered. And when his curtain finally fell, he wouldn't just lose me. He'd lose the life he thought he'd stolen right out from under me. When I called Robert to invite him to dinner, my voice was warm, light, like I was the same wife he thought he'd been fooling. "I've got something to celebrate," I told him. "Book off the evening. I want it to be just us, and a few people you'll be happy to see." He agreed without hesitation, probably imagining some romantic gesture to remind him how lucky he was. He had no idea I was planning the final act. I reserved a private dining room at a restaurant he liked, classy enough to impress, intimate enough for my real purpose. Then I called a few people, his sister, his closest friend, and 2 colleagues he still respected, the ones whose opinions he valued. I wanted an audience. Not for me. For the truth. Because Robert cared deeply about how he looked in front of them, and I was about to shatter that image in one perfect blow. When the night came, I wore a dress he'd always complimented, my hair done just the way he liked. I greeted everyone with warmth, laughter, making sure Robert was relaxed, basking in the glow of being at the center of attention. We ordered wine, shared appetizers, and he leaned in toward me more than once, as if this night was ours. And then, right when the table was warm with conversation, I leaned back in my chair and said, "Robert, why don't you tell everyone what you've been doing these past few months since quitting your job?" The table went quiet, just like I knew it would. Robert blinked at me, caught between confusion and the beginning of panic. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd been curating for weeks. I laid it in the center of the table like it was nothing more than a menu, then opened it slowly so each page faced the people who mattered to him most. There they were, photos of him at the apartment, receipts for dinners he hadn't shared with me, hotel bookings paid in cash, bank statements showing withdrawals that told their own sordid story. I didn't have to narrate. The evidence spoke with a volume no denial could silence. His sister's eyes widened. His friend shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Robert reached for the papers, muttering something about misunderstandings and out of context, but his voice cracked under the weight of what everyone could see. I sat back, calm, watching the color drain from his face. "You didn't lose your job," I said evenly. "You gave it up. You gave us up, and you thought I'd never find out." The room felt colder, sharper. Every eye at the table was on him, but the only gaze he couldn't meet was mine. And that was exactly how I wanted it. He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off with the final line I'd been saving for weeks. "Enjoy your freedom, Robert. You're going to need it, with no job, no savings, and no wife." My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The weight of the words settled over the table like a lead blanket. You could almost hear the moment his pride cracked. He glanced around, as if searching for an ally, but no one came to his rescue. His sister pushed her chair back, her face pale with disappointment. His friend shook his head slowly, as if realizing he'd been defending a man who didn't deserve it. I gathered my things with a steady grace, slipping the folder back into my bag. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I wanted him to remember every page for the rest of his life. As I walked toward the door, I didn't look back. The sound of muted voices and the faint clink of glasses followed me out into the hallway, but the only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady, certain. Robert had spent months living a performance. Tonight, I had given him his final audience. And now, it was time for my next act. The morning after that dinner felt different, lighter, cleaner, like the air in my lungs had been filtered of something toxic. Robert was gone before I even woke up, but for the first time, I didn't care where he'd gone or who he was with. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I made coffee and drank it slowly at the kitchen table, my phone buzzing with messages from people who'd been there last night. Most were short, variations of, "I'm proud of you," or "You deserved better." I didn't need validation, but I let their words sink in anyway. The days that followed were a blur of practical steps, closing joint accounts, transferring titles, finalizing the paperwork with my lawyer. Each signature I put on a form felt like reclaiming another piece of myself he'd tried to chip away. He didn't fight me for much. Maybe he knew he didn't have the ground to stand on. Or maybe he was too busy chasing whatever scraps of his other life he could salvage. Either way, his absence became my freedom. The woman he'd been seeing disappeared quickly once she realized there was no money left, no comfortable safety net to fall into. I imagined their last conversation, him explaining the fallout, her calculating just how fast she could walk away. A small part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. But then I remembered the months of lies, the stolen money, the humiliation he'd planned for me without my knowing, and all I felt was relief. With Robert out of the picture, my world started to expand in ways I hadn't realized it had been shrinking. I booked a solo trip. Nothing extravagant, just a week by the coast where I could wake up to the sound of waves instead of the weight of suspicion. I walked barefoot along the shore, letting the water rush over my feet, feeling the tide pull away months of anger and exhaustion. I caught myself smiling at strangers, laughing at little things again. It was like remembering how to breathe after holding my breath for too long. Back home, I started saying yes more often, to friends who wanted to meet for dinner, to opportunities at work I'd been too distracted to take on, to mornings where I simply stayed in bed with a book because I felt like it. I filled my space with people who lifted me up instead of wearing me down. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like mine. Every corner, every shelf, every quiet Sunday morning belonged to me now. I knew there would be moments when the past would tap me on the shoulder, when I'd remember the way things used to be before I knew the truth. But I also knew I wouldn't trade what I had now for the illusion I once lived in. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always come in the way you expect. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the wreckage of what you thought you wanted. The final step was signing the last of the divorce papers at my lawyer's office. She slid them across the desk, and I read every word. Not because I doubted her, but because I wanted to feel each sentence, to know exactly what I was walking away with. My hand didn't shake as I signed. When I set the pen down, it felt like I'd just closed the heaviest chapter of my life and placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. Stepping outside, the sun was warm on my face, brighter than it had felt in months. I didn't have anywhere urgent to be, no one's expectations to manage, no lies to decode. Just me, the open day, and the life I'd rebuilt piece by piece. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills every corner of your lungs, and felt a calm certainty settle in. As I walked to my car, I thought about how he'd left his job months ago, slipping out of one life into another without telling me. But today, I had matched him step for step, and made sure he walked out of mine for good.